Welcome, everyone, to the 6th episode of the Next Stage webinar series. I'm Tim Wilson, Executive Director of Western Arts Alliance. I'd like to open today's webinar with a land acknowledgement. Western Arts Alliance stands in solidarity with Indigenous peoples and is based respectfully in the now occupied territories of the bands of Chinook, Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and other tribes known in the space known today as Portland, Oregon. The land upon which Portland was built at the confluence of the Columbia and the Willamette rivers has served for millennia as a gathering space and trading space, connecting resources from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. And wherever you are calling in from, we invite you to join us in honoring the ancestors who've been caretakers of these lands and resources upon which we live today, and ask you to share in our commitment to preserve them on behalf of the generations to come. Thank you for joining us for the next stage. Are we post-pandemic yet? WA developed a series of webinars in partnership with the Taiwan Academy in Los Angeles to help the performing arts navigate the pandemic and to thrive. WA is supported in part by grants from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Oregon Arts Commission, and WEST staff. Please stay tuned after the panel for a live Q&A. We'll be able to sort of have a live conversation via the Q&A and the chat, as Tony's already pointed out. We encourage you to sort of jot your questions as you come down. You can enter them at any time and we'll get to those. Before we begin today, we actually asked attendees to take a brief survey in advance of the webinar. And here's what we learned. We had 31 respondents, 21 presenters, 7 from touring organizations, artists or artist managers, agents, and so on, and 2 in other categories, just general kind of arts administrators. Here's where everybody came from. They came from sort of around the country, 2 in Arizona, and you can see 12 in California, and so on. So a pretty broad cross-section of the country is represented in this data. And this is not a scientific poll given its small sample size, but we did have kind of input from around the country and from Calgary. And you can see from the presenters, here are the presenters responding to, have they changed policies or do they have plans to do so? You can see nearly 70% of the presenter respondents said yes. And then there were 4 that said no. And then there were 2 that probably didn't have an answer at this point, which we completely sympathize with. For artist managers and touring organizations, had the same or very similar question. And again, nearly 60% of them said yes, about 30% said no, and we had 1 respondent that declined to answer. Now, again, probably just sort of up in the air at this stage. And then here are how the policies are changing. We asked people to check sort of all that apply. And you can see that 70% are dropping the mask requirements. Almost half are not checking vaccination status. 70% not checking, not requiring social distancing. I know the text is cut off, but changes to COVID-related refund policies. And then we had some other responses, which we'll share with you now. Here are the kind of other responses, folks following the California Department of Public Health kind of mandates, moving to a status of strongly recommending masks, vaccine and negative tests will still be required. Folks who commented that they've ended their mandates for a long time, but they are tracking local department, health authorities guidance. And then again, another respondent that said, 2 weeks, they dropped their requirement. So that's sort of the general comments from the touring organization. Again, artists and agencies and so on responding. You can see how very similar data in terms of how they've changed their policies in response, to these recent changes. Especially most states now in the West have changed their policies mandates in the last few weeks. And then I think that is, here's the comment from the artist managers: will lower restrictions once our artists feel it is safe to do so. And based on our initial conversation with this panel, That was something I think that most of the panelists sort of will agree with. I'd like to sort of introduce our moderator, Antonio Gómez. Tony embodies the intersection of professional music, education, arts, presenting, and public media. He's done it all. He's passionate about intertwining these skills to connect learners of all ages with compelling cultural stories and inspiring art. He's a former K-12 teacher, and he manages the economically and culturally accessible education programs for Tacoma Arts Live. As a percussionist, Tony specializes in Afro-Latin, Mediterranean, Arabic genres. He performs with Trio Guadalajara, the Eurasia Consort, and the national touring music production of Tango del Cielo. He's studied in Cuba, Argentina, Panama, Spain, Italy, and Morocco. Small world, Tony is actually the vice president of the Western Arts Alliance board. Tony, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh my gosh, and on behalf of my mom, thanks for reading the whole bio. Thank you, Tim. Thank you so much. I am just really excited and privileged to work with an amazing panel of presenters up and down the West Coast today. And I'm coming to you from Tacoma, Washington, which is the land of the Puyallup Nation and the ancestral homeland of Salish peoples along the inner waterways of the Puget Sound. And I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, as well as, so here's your first kind of little question, panel, is if you would share a little bit about yourself, your organization, your experience in our field, and then share what is your top of mind issue right now. So as we are, literally, what is this, 5-6 days into the new mask guidance for California, Oregon, and Washington, what's your top of mind issue? So anyone want to start? All right, I will do this like when I was in the classroom. If you are wearing green, oh wait, everyone's wearing green today. Molly, because you are so clearly wearing green, we're gonna start with you.
Okay, and I unmuted myself first, so I self-volunteered. My name is Molly Clark. I'm the director at Cal Poly Arts, which is situated at Cal Poly University in San Luis Obispo, California. So a university presenter. We present all across the genres. Prior to this, and I will say I'm very new to this position. I started in July remotely and moved up here in September. What a time to start a job as a director of an organization. Prior to this, I was at Art Power at UC San Diego as artistic director for 9 years there. And I guess what's top of mind for me right now is, in most cases, we're sort of going against the guidance and sort of remaining with the protocols that once were. So my curiosity is around sort of audience reaction to that, and whether they're going to favor or be upset about it. And then I think also if this sort of relaxing of masking will maybe have some positive psychology around folks returning to events in general. So that will be, time will tell this spring.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Molly. And let's work our way up the coast and let's go to Robyn next.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Robyn Williams. I'm Executive Director for Portland 5 Centers for the Arts in Portland, Oregon. We have 3 venues and a total of 5 theaters. I've been with the organization for 21 years and been running performing arts venues for about 30 years. I'm a past president of the International Association of Venue Managers, where I was very active in the performing arts sector of IAVM. And so I've been on the venue management side for a very long time. Top of mind for me, since we just changed this past weekend, is where are the numbers going to go? You know, are they going to come down? Are they going to go skyrocketing up? And if that happens, then what? So that's what's top of my mind.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what will happen with the case numbers as our practices change across these 3 states? And up into Washington with Jill.
Hi, I'm Jill Barnes, the Executive Director of the Washington Center for the Performing Arts in downtown Olympia. I've been here for about 9 years. I've been in the industry for like 20 something. We have a 980 seat theater, and I think what makes us unique is that we have 18 community partners and we're their home. So every decision we make, how does it impact them? We also manage a theater space at our local community college, as well as the front of house and box office for a local theater company. So a lot of different venues, there are different rules at the moment with the different venues. And top of the mind right now, lots of things, but you hear from the people who are happy and you hear from the people who are not happy. I'm kind of wondering about the ones that are silently disappearing with with our change in regulation. So I'm wondering about them. How do we get them back? How do we communicate? What are they thinking?
These are great questions, and they really speak to the way that we're having to go in a lot of different directions at once right now. In terms of, Molly and Jill, you both asked a question that more or less was like, what are our audiences going to do next? How are they going to respond, to live performances, given this new guidance after our 3 states had, fairly clear and strong masking guidance, and people may have developed one level of confidence in that setting, and then how are they going to adjust to a new setting, with some people eagerly rushing toward it perhaps, and others kind of holding back. And Robyn, I think the point that you brought up is really important as well, in terms of how does our field continue to kind of intersect with larger public health questions that essentially for us become economic questions as well as programming questions, and questions of how we care for our artists, our staff, our public. What I would love to do next is just, in our preparation call, one of the things we talked about was how some of us are changing our policies that are in the House itself that are affecting audiences, while maintaining another policy backstage because of agreements we already have in place with artists. And so I'm just wondering if each of you could explain a little bit about what are the current parameters in each of your organizations, in terms of what your expectations are, and what is in place for each part of the equation.
For us, I think sort of the baseline is that Backstage is going to be in masks no matter what for the rest of our Cal Poly Art season, because that's what's been advanced with our artists basically through the end of May. And in most cases, we're sort of operating with whatever the artist's wishes are. I mean, because we have contracts in place to now try to renegotiate them and perhaps, have conversations about what they're comfortable with. I assume some may have different feelings than when we first had those conversations months ago. But many of the folks I've talked to, especially, tours that are really trying to keep their bubble tight, where if somebody were to get sick, it would crash the entire tour, like Broadway tours. The COVID protocols have been heavy, do not want to sort of roll back on those. And so that's what we're respecting at this point. And a lot of those, most of my advancing with agents and artists, it hasn't just been it hasn't been just around what's going on backstage. There are always questions about what's your audience policy as well. So for the majority of our shows, if it's in the contract that audience is masked or that we've advanced that, we are going to withhold that through the end of our season.
For us, once we didn't have a health authority to point to, as a basis for keeping our masking, vaccine, and testing protocols in place. We chose to let every show decide what they wanted. That, you know, they know their audiences better, they know what their artist needs. And so, I mean, we're like less than a week into this, but so far, it looks like front of house and back of house protocols have been the same. Like there so far hasn't been like one standard back of house and a different one front of house. It's been pretty much across the board. And it's been an interesting mix of absolutely no masks, no vaccines, nothing anywhere, to vaccinations, tests, and masks everywhere. The one consistent thing is that our staff, all of our event staff are required, they're required to have vaccinations, and they're staying masked. We have no intention right now to take any of our event staff out of mask. So that's what the parameters we're working in right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely have two different rules now for front of house and back of house. And we did a lot of prep work before we made our final decisions with that. So back of house is remaining pretty much the same, although all of our front of house staff still need to be vaccinated and masked. So, and then that's staying backstage. With so many local artistic partners, these rules make a really big impact. So if you think about dance recitals, for example, we did connect with our crew and talk to them about what they're comfortable with. And we have relaxed a little bit backstage. So dancers under 5 do not have to show a negative test to perform, and that'll be coming up in June. And we will also accept the at-home tests. Before we were only accepting tests from the lab, but we will now accept the at-home tests or the CVS tests that are done on site, that we know, when they took it and who took it. We just kind of felt like the government's mailing them out to people. We should probably accept those as proof of not having COVID. And then as far as the patrons, we dropped the masking and proof of vaccination or a negative test. And we did it a few days after the state dropped the requirements, but we're strongly encouraging masking. We have yet to do a show with our new strongly encouraging. I have a few ways that I think that might play out, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, and we also did a couple shows on the 12th, and right in that moment, and it was something that a lot of people commented in both ways, where some were just overjoyed and it was very emotional in one sense, and others who were feeling a great deal of apprehension. There's a question in the chat that I want to address. Lucinda asks, that since we know vaccinated people get COVID infections, why do we require proof of vaccination? And I mean, I'll, for my part, just share that some of these are led by public health guidance from the public health departments and agencies that manage our regions. And they're calculated more on hospital capacity for severe cases versus mild cases, as much as they are by our field or any field that's operating public events. Not sure if anyone wants to add anything to that.
I think that's a real important point, Tony, because I think that's where we get some pushback, is like, you can get it anyway, so why do this? And the thing is that our health authorities are making decisions based on hospitalizations. And if you're vaccinated, you're less likely to be hospitalized. And so to the extent we can help keep the hospitalization numbers down, the less likely we're going to end up getting shut down again. So I think that's where vaccinations for us could be really important.
Yeah, I think I agree. I also think at the time when we initially made these, we kind of, as an industry, as we were starting back up, a lot of venues had this requirement. And I think it made a lot of sense for a variety of reasons, including you're not going to share it with people. I call that the honeymoon period, when we thought we were all good. Hey, if we want to have nice things and participate in society, let's like have this campaign to help get people vaccinated. And as we were considering changing the guidelines, and if you thinking about it from a public health perspective, well, if we're really thinking, hey, we don't want to share COVID with people who come into our theater, or having them, spread it around, wouldn't it be more effective to require a negative test for entry than a proof of vaccination? And I think on one hand, a lot of people just feel more comfortable around people who are vaccinated than not vaccinated, and that's fine. And there's probably a lot of truth to that. But also, I have 3 kids and they've all been vaccinated and they all got COVID. Like it kind of feels like it's coming for us all at some point. And the reality is Omicron was, highly contagious. So it's a lot of decision making. And I think that's a really good question to ask. And it's hard not to have the government to kind of fall back on and say, this is why we're requiring it, because we have to have a large gathering.
Thank you. And this kind of brings us into the territory of communication overall. How is the process going communicating with, let's start with the public, with our audiences and our patrons? What are some of the high points of how communication is going? What are some of the challenges? What are you getting from your public?
I think one thing that's challenging for us, so we mainly use the Performing Arts Center, San Luis Obispo, for our series, and that also has a number of resident companies, who are making their own decisions about how they're going to be implementing these new guidelines. But I would say probably Cal Poly Arts is the most conservative or precautious in how we're approaching it. And, we're a little bit less nimble in that we aren't a resident company. So they're sort of making decisions for themselves, whereas we, have these contracts and are working with artists and agents. So I think we've been really transparent about, why it is we're making the decisions that we're making. And that has been, I would say, received mostly favorably by our audience members, and some of the initial communications that have come out, which, our Performing Arts Center is basically saying masks will be gone or will be strongly recommended during these performances, except for this list of Cal Poly Arts performances. And I think we're just being extra diligent about those, like, know before you go emails, because we are sort of the odd duck in the group. I think, anecdotally speaking, most people are appreciative that we're continuing to have masks and vaccination checks. We also have an audience that, demographically speaking, is much older and vulnerable. My most recent survey that came back for one of our shows was like 80% of the audience was in the 60 to 75-year-old range. So I think that also has something to do with how they're reacting to it. I've gotten a couple, very strong and angry emails about how I'm losing money because of what I'm imposing. But then typically when we check on those contacts, they haven't bought tickets for the last 10 years. So that has been my experience. So so far it's going okay. We'll see how it goes in practice once this is official.
I think for us, the biggest challenge was our governor kept upping the date when she was going to drop the mask mandate. At first it was like end of March, and we're like, okay, we've got some time to kind of figure out what we want to do and how we want to do it and get communications out. And then like days later, it's like, oh, I'm moving it up. And then days later, it got moved up again. And so we were really scrambling, going, what are we going to do? And then all the health authorities started backing off, and we're like, oh no, now what? And so, we had to, we put out a big press release that went out only days before we put stuff out. I mean, it was like not ideal communications. And but because we're letting the events determine what they were doing, like the Opera Symphony Ballet, they went and communicated as quickly as they could to their patrons. And then we just had to we started putting out Know Before You Goes earlier than we normally do. Trying to change every event page on our website was just this huge undertaking. With 5 theaters, we do so many events, and there's such a broad variety of them. We had every possible combination of, Max, Novas, just in our first week, that just trying to get the information there and, having the right information on the website was hugely challenging. And then there would be like miscommunications. Like we found this tweet earlier today about one of our events where somebody was really mad about, the messaging and the requirements, and it made it say like, well, this is what P5 is saying. And it wasn't even our website. It was a client website who didn't word things in a way that we would have worded them. So it's had some hiccups, and you just kind of stop, back up, regroup, keep moving forward. And we've been doing a lot of start and stops, but it seems to have shaken itself out pretty quickly today. So we'll see if that continues for the next few weeks.
Yeah, I like that orientation, which I think is our pandemic, post-pandemic orientation. Well, right now, I'll let you know in 2 hours, which is like 3 years in COVID time. But yeah, how about for you, Jill?
Oh, well, we announced publicly the change on the 7th, and we actually worked hand in hand with Tacoma Arts Live because they're just our neighbor right up the street. And we've been in really close communication with a lot of people in the West Coast, Washington, Oregon area. And I think a lot of us are on the same page with just slightly different timelines for various reasons. So we announced on the 7th, the Washington State, everybody dropped it on the 12th. We only officially are enforcing, have the changes as of yesterday. So I don't really have a lot of history to draw on. I would say the shows this weekend, people were pretty compliant, still masking and vaxing or showing their proof of vaccination. That went smoothly. A few people showed up without a mask and they were fine and they wore it, and it wasn't really a big issue. The ticket reminders with the new updates, I think that's really important. However, like our social media announcement and our local newspaper that did a big article about it, like no one's made any comments, which I'm shocked about and a little concerned, like no one reads it. So I don't know how it's gonna play out. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to anticipate. This is new territory for everyone, really, and I'm also thinking about what's coming to mind too is the study from Arts Fund that came out a few weeks ago that talks about this moment isn't, for the arts, this is not a return to normal or return to how it was. This is really a new chapter in our industry, in our field, and so there's a lot of things we can't anticipate. But there are a lot of questions like, can we read the tea leaves? Some of the questions, I'm looking at Mike's question in the chat, as well as one of the questions we got in advance in terms of what are we, what's the pulse with audiences? Folks want to know, like, are there a lot of people who just aren't showing up? So, the advanced sale is good, but then the night of, the numbers are quite different. I know that has been the case with us at Tacoma Arts Live, even with some of our bigger name shows in the past couple of months. And then others are wondering, is there anywhere where audiences are getting back up to pre-pandemic levels, and how are we envisioning how we're going to approach things like subscriptions and seasons for next year?
I
So-
wish that were the case, that we were having a great sales and it was just no shows. I think we're having an issue where we're not having the great sales. We're also having some no shows of folks who purchased and are not showing up. In particular, one of our largest donors, we've not seen them all year because they've been so hesitant to return to venues. They still sponsored events this year, but have not showed up to any of the events they have sponsored, for one example. Our ticket sales have been really, really rough this year. I would say, like, on average, depending on the show, probably 30% below projected. And we had a really ambitious season planned. This is a season that I inherited. And I think that when it was planned, there was they were looking at things through a much rosier lens, as it was being announced in June and masks were off and there was no such thing as Delta or Omicron. I would say we pushed through Delta okay. Omicron really stagnated things. Like there's something that felt different about that time, or sort of a return to those feelings of uncertainty in 2020. And I have not seen those ticket sales sort of pick up now. And I'm really curious to see, if these relaxing mandates, has a positive momentum on ticket sales. But I'll say in general, it's a lot more last minute ticket buying. So it's really, really hard to predict. Like, people are just waiting it out to see what state of the world we're going to be in, before the show happens, which, I can empathize with, but it's really nerve-wracking for those of us who are wondering how much in the hole we're going to end up this season.
For us, when we right after we first opened, we were seeing, no show rates around 20 to 30%. But over time, and even with the Delta and Omicron variant, it seems like it really depends on the demographic of the show. So the more traditional arts audiences definitely seem to be slower to come back. The numbers seem to be pretty, fairly low from normal. Commercial shows with a younger demographic, we're selling shows out and adding second shows, and they're coming, which really surprised me because I thought there might be some softening, particularly with Omicron, but this group, they're ready to spend the money. They want to come, they want to have a good time. And so I would say generally, it's still too early for us to know, with having a variety of policies is going to affect attendance, where a lot of people right now bought tickets with a mask and vax policy in place. For us, I am not seeing very many requests for refunds, and we are refunding to anybody who's like, I'm scared, this is a no vax, no mask show now, I want my money back, and we're refunding. And we're not telling a lot of people about that, but we're going to do that. And but we're not getting very many requests for refunds, so we'll see. I think all of Oregon, and certainly Portland, is, we just started this. We're going through spring break, our second week of spring break now. So in 2 weeks from now, what are the numbers are going to look like? And I think there's just a lot of people going, yeah, I'm kind of ready to go out. I'm ready to do stuff, but maybe I'm going to wait for a couple more weeks just to see what things look like. So we'll see.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think it's looking really genre specific of who is returning and who's filling the house and how comfortable people are. But it's the last minute ticket sales. People just they don't know what the future holds. So they've already been through all the holding on to my show tickets for 2 years or getting refunds or reschedules. So I think people are just, for many reasons, buying later and later.
Well, and that brings us to the question of, what are you looking at for next year in terms of how you're building your season, how you're, are you creating a structure that'll allow you some flexibility on safety protocols? And how is that figuring into negotiations with artists? And how is that figuring into how you're going to communicate with your audiences?
I'm pretty comfortable holding on to protocols backstage. Artists are in a different scenario. They're touring from city to city to city, and there could potentially be more physical proximity with employees and the artists, and they have a lot to lose, and they've already lost so much. So I'm very comfortable with that. I think it's in our industry mutually beneficial to do that, and I'm fortunate that I can do that in my organization. I know some states can't have these kinds of requirements. I really want all of our front of house. I want to get to a place for sure. I mean, we are there already, and I want it to stay that way, that our front of house protocols are the same. We can talk later what happens if there's a surge in cases, and I think that's a different conversation. But if we continue on the downward trend, I don't want to go back to proof of vaccination or a negative test or masking. And I ideally don't want to make exceptions for different artists, because it's really difficult to communicate to the public, and it's hard for them to know what's what when they're coming to an event.
Yeah, man, I would love to be in the space where it's the same protocols across the board, because this is it's so much work to manage and communicate about. And I don't know where we're going to go yet long term. We're a fairly small presenter. We only present normally around 40 shows a year. I know looking at next year, because we're not in the best shape financially, we're trying to book the stuff we think will really sell. Targeting young audiences, comedy, bring in Wheel of Fortune, or, the more commercially kind of stuff, and kind of avoiding things that we think we'd lose, that we typically lose money on. And we're just not taking as much risk because we're not in the position to do so. But so we'll see, but that's kind of how we're programming for next year.
I would say that we're, in terms of how we're negotiating the protocols for next year, I'm lots of offers out, not contracts yet. So we'll see how that process will go. I know that I have pressure from the university to make that language very sort of flexible, depending on what the county guidelines will be at that point. Again, I think trying to move into that, everybody's working under the same parameters as opposed to a show by show, but don't know how those conversations will actually go down as we're, executing contracts. In terms of, the planning for next season, as I said, I'm living a very ambitious season in the midst of COVID. So I think we will be scaling back, not to a depressing level, but just one that I think is sort of fiscally responsible for us to do so right now, given how much we are bleeding money this year, and it's really, really hard to stomach. So I have to be responsible in that way, but I'm in a very weird position because it'll be my first season booking with an audience that I don't know entirely well, and have a different aesthetic, etc. So I will say this though, in sort of conversations with folks who have sort of been pitching things, and will go back to agents will say, oh, this, they were here in 2017 and they sold out. That means nothing to me right now, because those same artists are appearing in this season and are really, really struggling. And so I think some of that data is flawed right now, especially because I'm dealing with an older audience. I don't know that those folks are going to return in the ways, and we haven't seen them return in this season. So a lot of those conversations just don't mean as much as they used to. The historical data on how the shows sold for us just is not playing out in the same way. And I can't count on it playing out that same way next year either, because I think we're going to be living with this for a while.
And thank you, panelists, for kind of anticipating some of the questions and comments in the chat in terms of, you know, what you're envisioning for what booking will look like for next year. I want to also address some of the other types of program that many of us have developed during the pandemic time, and a lot of organizations experimented with some virtual programming or digital services of one kind or another. Some of us found that we were able to connect with audiences that, you know, that are, you know, that may never come back to the house, so to speak. So what are your thoughts on whether and how to continue any of, you know, have you embarked on any of those services, and will any of them continue in some form?
Okay, I'll jump in. We did a little bit of streaming and virtual programming, and also some of our partners did. I'm not personally interested in it as part of our presenting season. The ROI is not there. We would get 14 people streaming, and to be fair, it is 2 productions. You've got your stage production and you have your video production, and it just doesn't make sense. It did not make sense for us. That said, some of our renters will continue to do it, and we'll support them in their efforts to do it. We have a lot of local dance companies, and of course, streaming a recital is wonderful for them so that their grandparents in another state can watch, right? And then I think this is worthy of noting. We do have a renter that comes in for several weeks, not consecutively, into the theater, and they do student shows. Well, what's happening with student shows? There's a lot of unknown with that, and it's a scary time to be that as your mission. And they are getting some requests from schools to continue educational streaming to the schools so they don't have to field trip. I think part of that too is there's a major bus driver shortage across the whole country. It's not even just paying for buses anymore, it's having bus drivers available. So it's a complicated thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say that as far as our presenting season, we aren't having discussions about doing virtual for next season. You know, I think if we end up in a sort of shutdown situation, you know, we will be doing something like that, but I hope we're not headed in that direction. And I mean, I agree that what we're here to do is present live in person performing arts, and that's, you know, mostly why we're all in this thing. But I did see the value of our virtual programs that we had at Art Power last year, had some really rich residencies that offered access to the artists that we would not have had otherwise, quite honestly, if they would have been on tour. So, you know, I did see some positives to that as well. I think the only sort of virtual realm that we're thinking about is, you know, relates to what Jill was saying in K through 12 programming. You know, we're not quite certain how comfortable schools will be bringing students to the venue perhaps. And so there might be some virtual offerings that we'll be making that way. But that's sort of the only piece of our program that we're talking about virtual and are still trying to do in person with K through 12 as well.
I would say probably the one silver lining we got out of COVID was being able to pivot our education programming to streaming. I'm fortunate that I have a foundation that underwrites my entire education program. And the artists that had really good content for the schools, their prices were reasonable, and we could serve so many kids. I mean, normally we're limited to, like, you know, you got, you know, 3,000 seats in the theater and that's it. And then, you know, instead, like, we're streaming Black Violin right now, and we've got them for the entire month. And, you know, we're going to be able to serve like tens of thousands of kids in, you know, all over the region. It's fantastic. So that piece really worked out for us, but we are absolutely not interested in offering streaming in any other format that we would take a risk on. In fact, we have one client who has been doing both live and stream of their event, and a big chunk of their audience is opting for streaming. So we're opening up a giant theater for 40 people as everybody else is at home. And I'm missing out on all the ancillary revenue with like food and beverage and that sort of thing. And so we were actually contemplating whether we should have a streaming fee, or there should be some extra charge to kind of make up for the lost revenue of not having people in the theaters. But that client has changed and said, oh man, this streaming is not working for us. So it's become a non-issue, but it's something that I think we're going to continue to think about just in case we're in this situation in the future.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, the line between, live programming and video-based or online programming certainly got blurred during the pandemic in terms of, who's presenting what. There's a specific question in the chat about selling virtual tickets to in-person jazz concerts, and if anyone has had success with this, that apparently some jazz clubs have had some traction, and there's a question whether any of the performing arts centers have had a similar experience. I'm seeing some head nods, no. So muted head nods. So yeah, and so there's I think the other thing that's coming out of this conversation is the variety of audiences that we serve, and the reminder that none of us serve a single audience. We all serve multiple audiences with different demographics of all kind of aspects of identity in those demographics, and also folks touched on education, and I've been chomping at the bit to talk about education because that's where I live, and Omicron was a thing. I was home with COVID and dealing with about 25% of my teaching artists out at the same time, and so I mean. And then, so, there was that phase, but on the other side of things, the pandemic has been explosive for our education programs in the sense that what Robyn shared in terms of our ability to get content out to a much larger population of K-12 students. But I know that each performing arts center has a different education portfolio. Some of us are out in the schools, some of us bring kids to our buildings, bring students to our buildings. So where are you at with education programs, especially as, where masks have not only come off in our venues, but also in most school districts where there had previously been masking. And some of us, may have agreements with artists to go out to schools, and now the parameters have changed. So where are you seeing where are you seeing things going with your education programs?
Well, we've been talking to the schools to kind of get a sense of whether they're going to be ready to do field trips again and that sort of thing. Now, we're kind of unique in that the schools that we bus in are only Title I schools. And we are the ones that hire and pay for the buses. I don't know what the busing situation is going to be because that issue is very real, but we can time our shows to where, it's the school rush is not a factor. So I think our intent is to bring back some live, kids on site shows. We also take shows into the schools ourselves. We usually partner it with a public show that evening. So we're going to do some of that. We're still looking to see what's going to look like streaming wise if artists that are putting out educational content are going to continue to offer streaming options, because we really liked the ability to do that. So my hope is that we actually land with a hybrid of both.
That's an interesting topic. So artists and agents who are on, take note of that interest in hybrid. I know our organization, we're looking at the same thing. We may offer some things that are touring in person and then have another, portfolio of virtual programming that's available in the same season. Molly, Jill, what's happening with education for you?
Yeah, we're looking sort of similarly at hybrid. We aren't doing any in-person K through 12 through the end of this season, and that's largely because we got the feedback from our folks in public education that it's just not something that they're going to take on this year. We are planning on, we collaborate with the Performing Arts Center on our K through 12 program. They sort of handle the matinees where folks come to the venue, and then we actually bring artists to the school on our side of things. So we're both planning on doing live in person for next year. We'll see how that goes, but we also just felt like the reach of those virtual programs over the past year was so much more than we ever could have imagined, getting to students who historically had not had access to those performances. So it just feels like, a piece of the program that we don't want to let go of. And we've had such positive feedback from students and educators about having access to those programs that they can play right in the classroom. So we'll be looking at some virtual options as well as the live in person as well.
Yeah, I think my resident organization that serves K-5 they want a hybrid. They want to do some virtual programming. The teachers have asked it. The teachers have equally said, we're so excited to come back live into the theater. I don't have an education department I don't have a Tony at my organization. So it's hard for me to have the bandwidth. I do anticipate that, and it's harder for us to get matinees or outreach into middle school and high school, but I think that I'd like to focus more, how do we get kids here at different hours, not during school time, to participate. We've seen a little bit of success with that the last couple months, and I think it might be something to build on. So what is the outreach that the artist is doing outside of school time hours?
Great, thank you. And interesting comment from Connie, which I think about a lot as an educator and as a parent, is the impact of screen time and the value of, I can tell you the exact show that I went to, as a matinee when I was a kid that spurred a life in the arts. And so, yeah, how do we strike that balance? So lots to think about there. I want to also, given where we are at time, remind the audience that we are open for your questions. So if you have a question you want to drop in the chat, in the Q&A, if you want to raise your hand, we can also put you on screen to share a question or comment. And while our audience is thinking about that, I want to jump to the question that that I would love to be part of our how we end the day, and that is, we have a lot of challenges on our plate. We have no shortage of challenges and change that we're dealing with. But what is something that we are excited about that fuels our energy and enthusiasm for the work we do? So I'm going to ask our panelists to think about that. Like, what's charging your batteries?
Well, I have to say there's light at the end of the tunnel. And for the past 18 months to 2 years, there were a whole lot of times that I saw no freaking light. And it was gloom and doom. And are we going to make it? Are our arts groups going to make it? Are clients going to make it? And I just feel like there's hope. And I haven't had that for quite a long time. And so that part is feeling really, really good, that I know we're going to survive. We're going to come out of this better and smarter and serving more audiences better, I think. But so we'll be better for the experience at the end of the day. But just knowing that, like, where you can go, yay, we made it. We made it. It's so much to celebrate there. And so we're trying to celebrate more of that as we still kind of cautiously navigate our future. But I'm immensely hopeful.
Thank you, Robyn. Molly, Clark, Molly or Jill, what are some of the things that you're hopeful about, or also I'm going to add grateful for, things that you are thankful for?
Yeah, I mean, grateful, I think that we're back, that we're not in shutdown. I mean, it is still super clunky and challenging, and every week brings a new wrinkle and ripple that we're having to deal with. But I guess I would much rather that than not being able to present. And I think, we are learning to live through this. I don't think there's ever going to be a going back for us. We're going to be dealing with the repercussions for a really long time, but that we're being innovative. We're rolling with the punches, we're coming up with these solutions on the fly, and somehow able to continue to present is something that I'm really grateful for. Even when I feel like I truly do not have any of the answers for any of this. I mean, Tim will tell you I was really slow to respond to becoming a panelist for this, because I just thought I have nothing of value to add to this conversation because I am so lost every day. But we're figuring it out. We're figuring it out, one foot in front of the other. And I'm really proud of us as an industry.
Yeah, that's great. You guys said great. I'm hopeful too. And I'm really proud of us as an industry too. And I think that people who care about the arts, they know, because I hear it all the time. Like, oh, I bet it's been such a hard 2 years for you. And they know and they care. And I think that I'm just excited I hope we don't alienate too many people for too long by changing the requirements, but I'm just excited to, again, welcome everyone back. I know there's a lot of people who stayed away because they weren't going to show their negative. Getting a negative test was hard, or they weren't vaccinated, and we need these experiences as a community to heal and remember that our humanness and all of those artsy things that we always talk about. I just want to celebrate and have fun with everyone again. I'm hopeful too. It's hard.
I think, the fact is none of us were prepared for this. No way were we prepared. We had no tools for dealing with it. I was looking at some real early comments, like when the pandemic first started, and I'm like, okay, everybody wash your hands. And we're like, oh, that'll take care of it. And we'll be out of this in a month. And, we had no idea. We had no tools. We had no information, and we didn't even know what to do with the information when we did. But I think that's really brought us together as an industry, that we all had to band together and share. I've never seen the performing arts sharing information ever in my entire career like we did during COVID. What are you doing with your audiences? What are you asking them? What are you studying? What do you do? I mean, it's just this barrage of information sharing that we never did. I mean, we've networked and, did some stuff, but I mean, it was like, we didn't have shows. So every day we were on a day worth of Zoom meetings, talking to this group about something and talking about this group about something else. And I hope that level of collaboration between all of us continues in the future, because I know I've learned so much by being able to talk to so many different people that I never had talked to before. And so I think that's another one of the reasons that we are going to build back better, is we've really learned the importance of each other and sharing information. It doesn't matter whether you're the artist, the agent, the venue, a presenter, producer. I mean, we're only getting through this because we all just kind of came together and figured it out. And so I think that degree of collaboration, I really hope will continue with all of us as we continue to move forward through this.
These are I'm inspired hearing the three of you talk about these things. And Molly, I'm coming back to that question of, but I feel lost. And, I don't know if it's a question of whether or not we're all lost. It's like how we go about being lost. I think we're all lost. There's no question there. But it's like, how do we do it? Do we do it in a way that is, driven by fear? Do we do it through collaboration, as Robyn remarked? Let's embrace the lostness, I guess, and figure out how we get through it. We have a couple other questions from folks that Lexus is asking about. How are we approaching promotion now and into next season, given the fact that we have seen a lot of pandemic hesitation or last minute purchasing from our audiences?
We are just putting more money in at the last minute and saving it more for the few weeks in it. I don't know, 3 to 4 or 5 weeks in advance. Also throughout the entire season, it's funny, like I have a new marketing director starting this fall, because we lost a lot of employees and we have recently hired more. And, with marketing, you often just kind of like keep adding marketing, like, oh, I've got this deal with this publication and this station and and you just kind of keep adding and adding and not taking away. And so we decided to call this, and we didn't do a subscription series, so I didn't have to worry about underselling someone who was a multi-ticket buyer. So we called this the year of the discount. So we really just did more tracking to see the efficacy of our marketing. Now, granted, people may not be attending for other reasons, but we're going to really change where we're putting our dollars next year, because if there was no return, like none, there probably won't be return, in another, we're just changing where we're putting our dollars and took the time to gather the data, but more last minute.
That's pretty much what I was going to say, because it seems that no amount of marketing dollars can be thrown at an event and make a difference right now, in terms of when people are if and when people purchase their tickets. And so most of our marketing is really like blasting folks a couple weeks before the event date, hoping that those last minute ticket buyers will sort of jump on our side of the fence. But otherwise, it just seems like there really is no amount of money that will move tickets for our shows, unfortunately, because that would be lovely.
Yeah, we're pretty much, I mean, my marketing department is not even a department anymore. We had to move it and embed it in another department because of lack of resources. But we're just pivoting to more social media. It's fast and quick to get out. We can watch the analytics of it. We're not placing print ads. At really not much else other than social right now, just because, like Molly was saying, the ROI is just not really there and not really moving the needle at all. So social media kind of puts it out there and creates a little buzz that we think does translate into some sales. So we'll see.
And I will add my 2 cents to this last question as well. In terms of one of the things that we were having a lot of discussions about in the WA community pre-pandemic was, how do we move more towards an engagement model in our field, and to do a yes and with our transactional work and concerts, but to connect with communities in different ways. And so one of the issues that has been big for us as an organization has been shifting the why that we're reaching out to people, so that it's not always a promotion message, but it is a connection message, and it's grant funded versus sales funded. And so that's another shift that might be on the horizon for some performing arts centers as well. And I want to thank the panelists. I know Tim's about to thank you, but I want to thank you as well. I just feel so privileged to soak in this wisdom for a little while. And Tim, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Jill, Molly, Robyn, for taking all of your time today. And I want to thank all of our audience and participants today for joining us. We'd love to hear your feedback, so look out for an email from us with a short evaluation survey. And if you're interested in finding out more about the Next Stage webinar series, you can find it on the westarts.org/the next stage with hyphens between. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.